but my secret is I just smile and say, follow me. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Life's too short not to really live. I got a big heart, I can let you in. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of
Hi there, and welcome back to Toxic Bliss, Surviving Narcissism with me, Awen Reese. In the last episode, Mike had called and announced his imminent return and hung up before I could even protest. I thought about this for a few moments, letting that inner argument run in my head as if I was a third-party observer. I secretly hoped that the side that was arguing to let Mike come back would win. I did miss him, the good version of him anyway. There were a lot of other concerns too, little things like bringing the groceries up the stairs, carting the laundry up and down from the laundromat, having a second income in the house. They may sound like stupid reasons to take someone back, but I was alone, very pregnant, scared, and unsure how I was going to make my way in the world. Having someone with me, almost anyone at that point really, would have changed things dramatically, and for all his faults, I loved him dearly. But yes, I did realize, even way back then, that taking him back would be the most foolish and the most self-destructive thing that I could do. In a rare moment of clarity and self-preservation, I called him back. Tina answered. I asked for Mike, and she said that he was outside doing something. I told her to please inform him that he was not to get on that train and come back here. I would not take him back. I also asked her to caution him against coming to Connecticut at all, because I had filed a police report about the forged check, and if he was in the state, he would be arrested. She chuckled at that and said she'd tell him. Okay, bye. I was shaking when I hung up the phone. It had taken every ounce of strength I had to make that call, and I started crying immediately. I wanted him with me so bad. Good Mike was a part of me. I didn't know how to live without him. But I couldn't live with good Mike and bad Mike at the same time. I didn't have the tools to effectively separate the two of them for good. I imagine it as though Mike was a pair of conjoined twins. One of them was my truest love of all, and the other one was a crazed maniac and a pathological liar. But in order to have one, I had to take the other as well. This wasn't an easy decision, and I don't want to downplay it here. I knew that giving up on the evil twin was the right decision. He would never change. But the thought that that meant giving up on the good twin broke my heart into 1,000 pieces again. Because I hadn't talked to Mike directly, I had no way of knowing if Tina had even passed the message on to him. I could see her possibly withholding that phone call from him because she wanted to get rid of him, but I could also imagine her wanting to keep him and using my phone call as a means to that end. Either way, I'd found out sooner or later. Either he'd show up or he wouldn't. I had done the right thing, but secretly, oh, all right, fine, who am I kidding here? I really hoped that he would show up anyway. This was where I started to spiral into a new sort of madness. A real madness, not the light, gentle, happy madness of the previous year or so. I decided not to tell my mother, or Vicky, or anyone that Mike might be on his way back up here. I knew what they would say, and I knew that they would have been right, and I didn't want to hear it. I was very aware and conscious of these thoughts, and I knew that keeping quiet about it would eventually blow up in my face, but I did it anyway. If he did get on the train and magically appear, I would just say that I didn't know about it. I was as surprised as they were, and then try to justify my decision to let him stay with me. I was becoming like him in some ways. I was willing to deceive and prevaricate to try to preserve my relationships with friends and family in order to get what I wanted. I knew that this was bad, and I worried about how far it might go, but if it meant having Mike back, it seemed less bad. I had started down a very slippery slope. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear this, but narcissism and codependency in many ways are different sides of the same coin. Although the intentions driving both disorders are very different, the actualization of them can be frighteningly similar. I wasn't all that fond of the person that I was seeing in the mirror. The next day came and went, with no sign of Mike. Another day, another week passed, and still he hadn't appeared, nor had he called me. I wasn't about to call him, because I knew I couldn't handle hearing his voice without caving, and what would be the point of calling him? I didn't want him back, so why open that door with any conversation? I was proud of my resolve, because the urge to call him and cry and ask him to come home was very powerful, but I stuck to my guns by the grace of God. Another month had passed, and the time for my son's arrival was imminent. I was having the Braxton Hicks contractions and all of that, but I needed this pregnancy to be over. I was having a very hard time of things physically. Those stairs, they were becoming the death of me, and I was miserably uncomfortable. At my last appointment with my doctor, we decided on a delivery date. Because of various complications that I was having, she thought that a scheduled C-section would be the best option. I agreed, and the date was set. Now things got a bit complicated. The logistics of all of this were tricky. Vicky said that she would take Maggie and keep her at her house. That was perfect, because I knew I wouldn't have to worry one bit about Maggie's welfare while I was in the hospital, and I appreciated that tremendously. But on the other hand, I wanted Vicky with me, and I didn't want to give birth all alone, but she was the best one to care for Maggie, so I would just have to cope. My mother had to work that day, so she couldn't even drive me to the hospital. I had a friend that I had met at the laundromat over the winter, and she said she'd be more than happy to drive with me, and she'd even stay with me for the entire event. I gladly accepted her offer. Even though we weren't the closest of friends ever, I was still very thankful to have someone with me. The day finally arrived, and I was packed and ready to go first thing in the morning. Vicky had picked up Maggie the night before, so that this morning would go a little more smoothly. I waited out back for my friend to arrive and take me to the hospital, but she never showed up. Time was moving along quickly, and I wasn't sure how long I should wait for her, or try to find another way to get there. I ended up walking to a little store nearby and used their phone to call my grandmother. I hated to bother her, but, well, I had a baby to deliver. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Gran came to get me, of course, and dropped me off at the hospital entrance. I made my way to the desk, and they rang for a nurse from the delivery floor to come get me. Thankfully, I was in no shape to be hiking across this monstrous hospital. I got settled into the room, and they hooked up all the monitors. I wasn't too flipped out about being alone at this point. There was a constant stream of nurses and others in and out of my room. One nurse had come in and looked at the fetal heartbeat monitor, and adjusted the probe on my tummy, and then checked the monitor again. Then she grabbed the paper printout and ran out of the room. Well, that can't be good, I thought. I overheard her talking in whispers with my doctor out in the hallway, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Yeah, this definitely wasn't good. My doctor came in a moment later and said, "Well, we're moving up your C-section. We're going right now, okay? Anyone you want to call before we move?" I shook my head no, but said what was wrong. She said there were just some unusual readings with the baby's heartbeat, so we weren't going to wait and see. We're going to go get him out right now. But don't worry, he's okay. Don't stress. Yeah, right. Sure. No problem. She wasn't having any more Q&A session time. It was go time. Right now. Scared is an understatement, but I tried to be as calm as I could. As far as I knew at that moment, the baby was okay, just having some weird heartbeat rhythms. We were in the hospital, and my doctor was excellent, and she was also my surgeon, so I felt very safe in her hands and prayed for all I was worth. I was brought into the OR and moved onto the table and sedated very quickly. I was only partly conscious for the proceedings, and I remember waiting to hear him cry after they took him away, but I didn't hear anything. I fought back the tears and swallowed hard because I didn't want to make any noise so I wouldn't miss the sound of him crying. They worked on him for about 5 minutes, and with each passing second, I was filled with a growing sense of dread. No one was talking to me. Everyone was around him and whispering. I had no idea what was happening. Now, don't get me wrong, I was grateful that they were focusing on him, but I was desperate for a word on his situation. And then finally it happened, a tiny little cry, followed by louder and louder ones. Everyone in the room sighed and laughed and smiled. Phew, he was okay. Thank God. They swaddled him up and showed him to me, but they had to rush him off to the NICU to do some tests and get him on a heart monitor. And then I crashed. I woke up with no idea where I was, what was going on, or anything that had happened. I was in an intensive care recovery room, and there were people milling all about. I made a noise, and someone turned and said, "Oh, good, you're awake. How you feeling?" I had no idea how I was feeling. "I'll go get your doctor," she said, and smiled as she left. I looked around the room and saw all kinds of monitors and blinking lines and several IV lines dangling down into my arm, and I had an oxygen mask on. I glanced at the monitor and saw that my blood pressure and O2 sat seemed really good, but what was going on? What happened? I got that answer when my doctor appeared a few minutes later. She checked all my vitals and listened to my heart, and she said she was very glad to see me. They almost lost me. Apparently, I crashed in the OR, but they had resuscitated me and I was okay. She said it was most likely stress and trauma from the C-section, as I had been diagnosed with preeclampsia and gestational diabetes during the pregnancy, but I should be fine now. She lifted the bed so I could sit up and removed the oxygen mask and asked about my pain. My chest really hurt, and I had a monster headache, but I couldn't tell much else. I asked about the baby. Was he okay? Where was he? Could I see him? She said that he was fine, and they would move me to a normal room now that I was awake and stable, and they'd bring him right to me. It took a while, as these things do in hospitals, to get moved and settled, but they finally brought him in. The nurse placed him in my arms and started to show me how to hold him and asked about breastfeeding and all that, and I was a little dismissive. I just wanted some quiet, alone time with him. I told her that this was my second child and I knew what was up. I just wanted some time alone, and she smiled and left. His eyes were open, and he had this amazing tuft of dark curly brown hair on his head. He was fantastic. Another nurse or someone came in with a pile of paperwork. Hospitals are really annoying like that. But it was time to fill out the birth certificate and other things. I told her that I didn't know what name I wanted yet, and I wanted at least an hour without anyone pestering me, and could she please come back later. She agreed reluctantly, and I went back to bonding with my new, beautiful baby boy. And with that, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and find out what happens next. Welcome back. Only a few moments after the nurse had left, the phone rang. Oh, come on! I answered it a little more aggressively than I should have, but hey, I'd just been through something, and I was allowed to not be my best self right now. "Hi, baby." Oh, dear God, come on! I think I even said that to him on the phone, but I can't quite remember. "How are you? How's our baby? Is he as handsome as his dad?" he asked in his stupid singing voice. "How did you get this number?" I asked. He just scoffed and continued pelting me with a barrage of questions. I started crying. I was too frustrated. I was hormonal. I was coming off some pretty serious medications, and I was not at all mentally prepared to talk to him. "Have you named him yet?" he asked me. "No," I said between sobs. "Oh, good, because I thought of the perfect name for him." He gave me the name that he had thought of, and I won't say it here because it is actually my son's name, though we are trying to start the process to get it changed, but I didn't like it. The name he chose did have a lot of significance to us as a couple, but not to me, not to my son, and not to the me that was not in a relationship with Mike. I said no. But in my weakened state, both mentally and physically, I was no match for him. He launched into an hour-long diatribe about how we were going to get married and would have a wonderful life together, and we would be a family for real now. He loved me beyond all else in the universe, and all he wanted was me, and now our son, too. I had to give him a chance to be a good father and to raise his son. He was my family now, and our son should have a name that reflected that. He was my future. I just cried quietly as he went through his oration. I agreed to everything he said. It wasn't so much that I had given up or given in. I was just so alone in that moment. It was just me and Mac, asleep on my chest, and I was feeling particularly sorry for myself, having gone through this birth experience alone. Not one person in my family could have taken a day off to come be with me. Mike reminded me of that, and I agreed. That was terrible. He told me to call him later when I was feeling rested, and I could pick the date that he'd come back up here for good this time. I said okay and hung up the phone. When I filled out the forms for the birth certificate, I did use the name that Mike had chosen, but I had decided to call him Mac. That may not be his legal name yet, but that's what we called him, and from that day forward, Mac was my truest love ever. A nurse had come in again about the same time and asked how things were going. I said fine, Mac was sound asleep and doing well, and I would attempt to feed him as soon as he woke up. I asked to have the phone turned off in my room so I could rest, and she just unplugged it and took it with her. Problem solved. I put a pillow on the bed between my legs and made a little nest for Mac to lie in. He didn't wake up when I moved him, and I just leaned back and closed my eyes for a blessed nap. I woke to the soft sounds of him not quite crying, but just alerting me to his presence, and I picked him up and fed him, and finally had that moment of baby bonding bliss. He was the most gorgeous baby boy I had ever seen, and I instantly loved him more than anything in the world, aside from his sister, of course. When he had finished his first feeding, I had to go to the bathroom. I was a little scared because my first C-section was a nightmare and incredibly painful. I wasn't sure how much pain I was in still, but decided to give it a go. I put Mac in his little lasagna pan bed thing and slowly stood up. Wow, that didn't hurt at all. I walked slowly to the bathroom and went without any problems. Oh, this was glorious. When I came out of the bathroom, I walked over to Mac in his little bed and decided to change him and put on one of the cute baby outfits I had brought with me. I removed his diaper, careful of the umbilical cord stump, and noticed that he wasn't circumcised. Oh, I thought, I wonder when that's supposed to happen. Or is it? I don't even know. I suddenly realized that I had no idea what to do with little baby boy parts. I didn't panic, though I came close, and I put a clean diaper on him and took him over to the sink to give him a wash before putting his new cute little onesie on. I found some bottles of baby wash and shampoo in the sink, and I was washing his hair as the nurse walked in. "Oh," she said, "well, it seems like you have everything well in hand. Do you need anything?" And I said no, but I did have a question about circumcision. I had overlooked that, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. So she explained the procedure to me and said I could do it or not. It was totally up to me. And I said I'd think about it and let her know. She left, and I finished Mac's first little bath and got him dressed. Oh, he smelled so good. I climbed back in bed and got Mac nestled in his nest again. A breastfeeding specialist had come in to see how the feedings were going, and I said, all right, but I wasn't sure if he was getting enough milk yet, and she said, that's fine and normal, just keep doing what I was doing. A few hours later, my mother came to visit after she had gotten off work that day. This was my first visitor. They had arranged a very fancy dinner that's typically for the new mom and dad, but since it was just me, I shared it with my mother. There was even a bottle of champagne, which surprised me, and I didn't drink it because I was breastfeeding after all. We ate our dinner, and then Mom had to go sit with her new grandson for a while, which was great because I wanted a shower really bad. When I came out of the bathroom, I had more visitors in the room. Vicky was there with Maggie. She had brought her to meet her new little brother, and I was ecstatic to see them both. I felt a lot better about life now that I had some people around me, and I cuddled with Maggie every second of their visit. She was having a great time at Vicky's and thought her little brother was adorable. She wanted to call him Spike, since after I washed his hair, it dried sticking straight up. So, Spike it was, for now anyway. We had a nice long visit, and Vicky said she'd be back with Maggie tomorrow, but to call her if I needed her overnight. She'd come right away. And I had wanted to talk to her about Mike's call and all that had happened during the delivery, but we needed some quiet time to do that. So we all said our goodbyes, and Mac and I were left to go through our first night together. The next day was a disappointment. I had wanted to go home, but they wouldn't let me because Mac had lost 2 ounces and they feared he wasn't getting enough from the feedings. They wanted me to start bottle feeding right away, but I said no. It does sometimes take a little bit for the milk to come in fully, and if I bottle fed him now, the chances of that were pretty slim. We had quite an argument about it, which eventually led to a conference in my room with my doctor, Mac's new pediatrician, the nurse, and a representative from La Leche League. Mac's pediatrician was a grizzled 70-year-old man who clearly wasn't on board the Empower Women bandwagon. My irritation with him was obvious. The nurse was on his side, but my doctor, the La Leche League representative, and I were steadfast against them. I worried that this was going to get ugly, but we came to an agreement. If things weren't improved by the next morning, or if Mac had lost any more weight, I would agree immediately to bottle feedings. He would be fine, and I wasn't about to wait too long, of course, but I wanted to give my body the chance to do what it needed to do. Come to find out that stupid nurse bottle-fed him the moment she took him from my room after that meeting to take him to the nursery to check his vitals and all. I was furious. I called my doctor and the pediatrician and demanded to be released immediately. My doctor gave me an all clear because I was fine, but that darned pediatrician was being a pain. He finally gave in, and Mac and I left that evening. I did end up bottle feeding him, despite trying every trick in the book to get enough production to sustain him. It just wasn't happening, but I had tried everything I could, so I didn't feel too guilty about it. About 24 hours after being home, I'd started to take a turn for the worse. I was vomiting heavily, I had a very high fever with chills, and aches and pains everywhere. I called Vicky and she came right over. As soon as she saw me, she called my mother and asked her to come over and stay with Maggie and Mac because she needed to take me to the ER right away. It's a good thing she did, too. The C-section incision had become infected and it was posing a rather significant threat to my life. I was brought into an OR immediately for an emergency surgery and debridement of the wound. Vicky was still there when I woke in recovery this time. She gave me the rundown of all that had happened, and she had even handled all the logistics of the kids' care and things like that, since I was going to be in the hospital for a bit. Once I was comfortable, Vicky would pick up the kids for my mom and take them back home with her. There was honestly no one in the world I would ever, even to this day, trust my kids with more than Vicky. Knowing they were in her hands made me sigh with relief. She said she'd bring Mac in every 2 hours if I wanted to work on the breastfeeding, but at that point, he had already taken to the bottle after a day and a half, and my body really needed to focus on itself right now, so I abandoned that hope for good. Vicky stayed until I was put into a room and I was settled for the night. The next morning, the nurse told me that I was going for a specific treatment for wound care to help get rid of this infection. I asked what it was, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll love this." Okay. I was too tired to argue or demand more information. They wheeled me clear across the hospital to this special room with these giant metal tubs like whirlpools. I wasn't allowed to get up or walk, so they had to put me on this sort of backboard attached to a harness that lifted me up into the air, swung me across the room, and lowered me into one of these pools. That was terrifying, but the pool was amazing. The water was so warm and all the way up to my neck, and the jets felt good on every inch of my body. The water was treated with some kind of crazy antibiotic stuff, and all I had to do was lay there and veg out for half an hour. They would be doing this 3 times a day for the next 2 days. That nurse was right. I loved it. Or at least I loved it in the beginning while I was still on a Dilaudid drip. Dilaudid is a very powerful painkiller. But once they started weaning me off that, these trips to the pool were not so much fun. I spent a total of 5 days in the hospital to treat this infection. I was allowed to go home, but only if I swore to stay in bed. I had a Foley catheter in, no bathroom trips, no getting up for a soda, no rolling around, nothing. I was to stay still and have 2 visiting nurse visits a day for at least a week, and more if there wasn't clear and obvious improvement. Well, this was going to be fun. Vicky offered to take me and the kids to her house while I went through this, and that would have been the smart thing to do, but I felt so bad for everything she had already been through, and I just couldn't add that on top of it. So I went home. Vicky spent a lot of time with Maggie, showing her how to hold Mac and move him around safely and all of that stuff that I wasn't allowed to do. Maggie took to it like a fish to water, though, and she became her brother's keeper. Thankfully, Mac was the most agreeable baby I have ever met. He slept through the night from day one. He'd make cute little burbly noises if he was hungry or wet instead of screeching, and he was just the happiest little guy ever. He would lay on my chest and hold onto my thumb, happy as a clam. He was also perfectly happy in his sister's arms as well. I had a small bassinet that I had put on the floor next to the couch, so he was within arm's reach of me whenever he was sleeping. The visiting nurse had shown Maggie how to boil his bottles, and all of the equipment that she needed sterilized for my wound changes. This was concerning to me. She was only 7, and I wasn't that comfortable with her dealing with pans of boiling water, but she was a pro. This kid became a 30-year-old mom within 24 hours. I wouldn't have made it through this time without her, and to this day, I feel an overwhelming sense of guilt that she was forced into a situation where she had to become an adult overnight because of the stupid choices and decisions that I had made in life. But she was my rock. My mother would come over every day after work and make a good dinner for Maggie that didn't consist of cold sandwiches or microwave food, and she'd bring by whatever we needed and take a bag of laundry home to wash for the next day. Vicky came by almost once a day as well, and I had given them both keys since I wasn't able to get up and go down the steps to let them into the building. We had developed a system, and it worked. It wasn't ideal for anyone, but it worked. We made it. Eventually, I was back on my feet, and life returned to normal. Mac had to wear a Holter monitor for a week after we had come home, but his test turned out fine. His heart was just fine, and he was going to be okay. I would be okay, Maggie was okay, and life could get back to normal. Mike had called often during these few weeks of recovery, and I would go back and forth from being happy and reassured by his calls and annoyed and irritated that he wouldn't just go away. He kept asking when I wanted him to come back, but I never gave him a solid answer. That would have to change soon, but for now, I didn't need or want him around. I was content, and I had my hands full as it was. I spent that summer solely focused on the kids. We spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. They were both absolutely smitten with Mac, and the whole family remarked on their newfound love of infants. Grandpa had restored a bright red wagon and would take the kids around the block in it. Grandma had bought a playpen, a high chair, a swing, baby clothes, baby bathtub, baby everything for her house, as if she had her own infant on hand. I would leave Mac with them when Mom and Maggie and I would go shopping, and we would come back hours later to find them laying on the bed with Mac between them, cooing and eyeing and singing to him. They didn't seem to want to let me take him home. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, and in fact, Mac took his very first steps from me to his grandpa, 'cause he had to go get his grandpa. I will never forget that. They were very mindful of Maggie's needs as well, and they never made her feel that they liked Mac better than her. Maggie and my grandmother had a very close, special relationship, one that I wish I had had with her as well. These kids were loved beyond measure, and it made my heart very, very happy. You know, it's funny. This is the 19th episode that I've recorded, and I can talk about Mike till the cows come home without a tear falling from my eyes. But my kids? Whew! I went through an entire box of Puffs Plus with this episode. They're now 18 and 24 years old, and I love them more with every passing day. Regardless of some of the things that we've all been through, I still think that I am the luckiest mom on the planet, and nothing will ever change that. So that's where we're going to end this episode today. Next time, the prodigal boyfriend returns. Until then, thank you for listening and take care.
People ask me what my secret is, I just smile and say